All right, well, we thank you so much for participating with you or with us in today's presentation. We're really happy that you've joined us, and we're excited to begin because I think this is going to be a really interesting session for all of us today. My name is Felicia Campbell. We also have with us Kim Bullivant. She is a marketing manager, as am I, with the COSTARS program. And we also have two guest speakers with us today. We have Josh Hinkle and Ann Hughes with us, and we'll share more about their experience as we move forward in the presentation. So as local public procurement units, our main focus is serving our community. The business to client level of service you provide is affected by things like staffing, which includes not only training, but also the motivation of your staff, the staff's personality, how do they deal with people and problems. But your service capabilities are also affected by things like communication systems. If a client calls and the call isn't answered, does the client have a clear alternate route to contact you with their concern? Also, efficient work processes to save time and effort for your staff and clients. Do you have something like an online process for a client to fill out a form, or do they have to pick it up in person or even download it and then send it in to you via postal service? Also, we want to look at workflow. How many times does your staff have to touch a request prior to the completion of the request? Right now, security especially is important to an organization, the security of data and your clients' data. Do you feel secure in your current security measures? And then lastly, effective and efficient spend of your budget. Making purchasing decisions that provide increased value to your clients is certainly going to affect your service capabilities. COSTARS can provide members with savings on things from big ticket items all the way down to things like office supplies, pens and pencils, allowing your organization to focus more of your budget on client-facing expenses. These kinds of system and process factors are the ones that we're going to focus on today. We'll talk about technologies that are currently available and just down the road, and that will allow you to increase your service capabilities by providing more efficient and secure work processes.
You're muted again. I don't know if it's when you're switching slides.
Oh, that is so
muting
weird.
You. Yeah, very weird.
My Teams is acting up on me today. Well,
yes, it is.
I have one more, so I'll watch that button. So today we invited Josh Hinkle, which thank goodness he's a technology expert with all of my issues with Teams today. He's here to discuss the direction technology is heading, as well as can incorporate system and process upgrades to increase the service you provide to your clients. Josh has a vast knowledge of technology and experience in many of the LPPU member categories eligible for COSTARS membership, so he gets your business. He currently serves as a board member on the Technology Council of Central Pennsylvania, whose mission is to bring together the technology community, unleashing unimaginable capacity for the Central Pennsylvania region to thrive. He was formerly chairman of Adams County Connected, a community initiative to improve internet access in the county for the benefit of schools, government services, and commerce. He also previously was Chief Operating Officer for York-based Healthcare System Connections and Chief Information Officer and Security Officer for Spirit Trust Lutheran, where his accountabilities included HIPAA privacy compliance. And he was also National Head of Data Center, Network, and Information Security for the American Heart Association, where he was responsible for managing the organization's enterprise-wide technology infrastructure, as well as PCI, payment card industry compliance. We're really excited to have Josh share some of his knowledge with us. Thanks for joining us today, Josh. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. I know that there's a lot of things you could be spending your time on today, and I hope that you find today's event worth your time and consider coming back for another event when COSTARS has another. Waiting for the screen to come up. Felicia, can you confirm that that's now showing?
I see it.
Awesome. Okay. Obviously, this is just the title page, but we are here to talk about technology roadmap keys to upgrade your success. that being said, there we go. A little bit slow for the presentation moving forward today. So do a little bit of introduction. Felicia did most of that for me, so I appreciate that. I don't have to talk much about that. A couple of things that I do want to drive home from an introduction to myself is just that I've been a lifetime resident of rural central Pennsylvania, live here in the capital region right now. Felicia talked a little bit about my technology experience, number of years. I think I put 23 in here. I used to stop talking about it at over 20. I should probably go back to that and quit dating myself for how many years I've been doing this. From an actual role standpoint, I think it's always important whenever we talk about some of the solutions and your needs that, you know, I give a little insight to the fact that I started as a network security and server engineer, did some project management before I started working in the management suite, making more strategic decisions because I've come from that realm where I've had my hands in the technology and actually been responsible for building an implementation of that. My experience comes from enterprise, medium, and small business. So from all sizes of the business, all being very different. And I think that provides a lot of perspective that no matter how large or small your organization is that has similar needs, how you approach those needs will be very different just based on the resources you have available to you. The industries that I've worked in has been education, manufacturing, nonprofit, healthcare, and government. There wasn't necessarily a focus in my mind of where I wanted to be other than opportunity and progression, but being in each one of those sectors has allowed me a pretty broad view of what each needs in an individual and as well as some standards that work across all the different industries. As Felicia mentioned a little bit, a lot of data and security background, PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, GLBA compliance, and CMMC compliance. I would say that the one that is the most up and coming is the CMMC compliance. It's related to government and DoD regulations for a lot of manufacturing. That's been one that has been coming through with some best practices. So for anybody that's out there that may be part of that, there's a pretty good roadmap that has developed for that compliance in the recent times. From an agenda standpoint, I want to talk a little bit about regional technology groups that you could use as resources, depending on where you may be geographically, or maybe you want to have multiple resources statewide. I want to talk a little bit about governance models for success, what I like to refer to as the 3 Ps, referencing lean that I imagine you're all familiar with, and then NIST as well. Without a governance model, it's a little bit unorganized. You might not be moving and rowing in the right direction. I want to talk about how to leverage all 3 of those models for your success moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about technology trends and road mapping, some of the things that we're seeing within technology and how it may specifically apply to your organization right now, specifically in education, nonprofit, and government. And then last but not least, it doesn't do us any good to talk about how to be better and how to implement technology if we don't find a way to provide some funding for it, right? So we'll talk a little about the recent stimulus funding that is out there. Some of it is as recent as of last week, but there is ways out there to pay for some of the solutions, and we need to make sure that we capture that. So from a regional technology councils, there's 3 main ones that I selected. I did not mean to omit anybody, but it'd be possible to make a list statewide for everybody. So I went with 3 of the biggest and most active organizations throughout the state. There's the Technology Council of Central Pennsylvania that is located here in Harrisburg. I would like to emphasize that it is for Central Pennsylvania, and that branches out well beyond the capital region. I think traditionally it's probably been a little more Harrisburg focused, maybe Harrisburg, York, Lancaster. As I mentioned before, being a rural Central Pennsylvania, I grew up in Adams County. And I'd like to make sure that any of you that may be from Adams, Franklin, Perry County, Lebanon areas out through there, this is not just a Harrisburg centralized group. It is for a broader group. And we do have members from across the state that want to have a presence in Harrisburg. We have the Pittsburgh Technology Council and then the Philadelphia Alliance for Capital and Technologies. Specific to the Technology Council of Central Pennsylvania, the mission is really about bringing together technology for the community. There's a belief that if we can bring technology, the capacity for the region to thrive is really endless. We want to raise the profile of technology. There's a lot of opportunity here for technology. We just might not always realize it. We may not always realize that we have startups and other people that are doing work, we want to raise that profile. We also believe that the businesses should be engaged with the council. There's a lot of opportunity for the business, even if you are not a technology organization. All the events are driven from being collaborative, diverse talent, networking, growing your business, promoting the region. The Pittsburgh Technology Council, obviously located in Pittsburgh, is a very active, very large organization. People drive in from hours on the western side of the state to participate in their events. And I've been to a couple of them and think that they do a really nice job of inclusive of that whole western side of the state. They're focused on business development, talent retention, government relations, visibility services, which would be marketing and branding, and growing all of the technology throughout the Pittsburgh region. I think that everybody's probably aware that Pittsburgh right now is one of the hot markets for technology. We always hear about Silicon Valley, maybe Austin, Texas, Cary, North Carolina, and Pittsburgh has really, really reinvented itself and grown from being the coal city to a technology-driven city. The last one that I want to identify is the Philadelphia Alliance for Capital and Technologies. And I find this one really particularly interesting because of how they branded themselves out of the gate, focusing on capital investment for technologies rather than being a technology council. The vision is to be the go-to resource for fast-growing companies and drive entrepreneurship and innovation in the Philadelphia region. They put capital in the very beginning of some of those deliverables, talk about connecting customers, retaining and growing the talent, and an interesting mentoring connect program for small startups and entrepreneurs looking for somebody to mentor them through that process. So those are the three groups that I wanted to identify within the state. Again, I apologize for anybody that may have been omitted. There are plenty good organizations throughout the state in different locations, but those are the three large ones that I chose to focus on today. So that covered us the whole way across the state. I want to talk a bit about governance and best practices. One of the things that I believe wholeheartedly is there's some base foundational things that you need to do in your organization to be successful, particularly when it comes to technology. 3 Ps are policy, process, and procedure. So I'll reference that throughout the presentation. And I just think it's important that we understand the policy, process, and procedure is really about how our organization manages exactly that, the policies, processes, and procedures. It is very supportive of things that come after that, whether it be lean practices, NIST practices, or compliance. So let's dig into the 3 Ps and give some examples so that everybody has an understanding of what I'm talking about. From a policy standpoint, it becomes formal agreed upon standards defined by the business. Some examples that may be a technology acceptable use policy, maybe disaster recovery policy, and it may be onboarding, offboarding policy. Those are all pretty technology driven policies, but it is important as we'll get through this to understand that that does not mean it's solely an IT function. It's really a collaborative effort from the business to say, what is our acceptable use? What does disaster recovery look like? Which is a very important business discussion around understanding downtime and recoverability. Onboarding and offboarding is really any hiring manager within the business. It's HR, it's finance, it's IT. Everybody has to be on board in those policies. From a process standpoint, that could be the combined steps that are in place to achieve a result. What is the policy? Who's performing that policy? Is it specific to backup? Is it specific to onboarding employees? But that process for those policies needs to be in place so that it's pretty seamless. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the workflow concepts that can be done with technology, some of the government service oriented if-then type statements in web applications that if you submit a form and it says this, then do that. It will become automated, it'll become more seamless, it'll become more efficient in your processes day to day, which then helps for creating value in the customer base. All some of the goals from the lean strategy. Procedures are quantitative. They're quantitating the configuration of tasks and how you did something within that policy, the specific way that you did the actual task assigned. We do these every day within organizations. It's just important that we have a context in which we talk about. I refer to them as the 3 Ps with all of our customers. policies, processes, and procedures. And we spend a significant amount of time strategic planning with our organizations to make sure that we all understand what these are internal to our organization and how we support them. Let's talk a little bit about lean. The lean history is pretty interesting, and a lot of times things come to mind that we've heard of more recently. Some of the luminaries, Toyota and Ford, have used the lean model over the years of manufacturing vehicles. The first name that often strikes people is the story about Toyota and how they changed manufacturing years ago. One of the things that people don't always realize is that this started hundreds of years ago and people trying to do things more efficient. We don't think about it that way as we do more modern times now. But people were trying to invent for years and years and years and do things more efficiently in a manufacturing process. One of the things that we probably all heard about in history class is Eli Whitney. Came up with the concept of interchangeable parts. This was a form of the lean strategy of improvement and efficiency. The first person who actually integrated the concept into the manufacturing system was Henry Ford. And I think we probably all know that story, that you can have any color you want as long as it's black. He was the first person to mass manufacture vehicles, but there was a catch to it. He was mass manufacturing vehicles that were all black, weren't interchangeable. It was very efficient, but not flexible in what the consumer wanted to see. From that standpoint, Toyota was inspired by that and decided they're going to reinvent it. And that becomes a story that most people know most recently about how to leverage lean in a manufacturing environment. They shifted the focus from the use and utilization of machines to the work from the total process. And I think that's really a solid handoff to technology, because as technology has evolved, we quit focusing on individual systems and started focusing on the entire process. That total process is really about the entire business. I put this in and it's a video from Lean, and I decided that I wasn't going to try and run the video for everybody in case that it didn't run, but I did get it to stop on this particular image. And one of the thoughts that I came away with this image through the 2-minute bit from explaining Lean was start where you are. And the video really talks about how everybody gets caught up in where they're at, what they need to do, where they need to get to. And they forget to just stop and talk about where they currently are and how they can make a difference. You can tell from the slide that there's a bunch of different people with identified titles. And I like to have this conversation with my team on a regular basis, because we as individuals, we as people always like to say, well, you know, if this person did this or this person did that, then we could have gotten this done. And one of the concepts here for this particular video in Lean is it doesn't matter what your title is. If you're the CEO or if you're middle management, or maybe you're somebody that actually does some of the implementation, start with where you are. What can you do to do things better? How can you fix processes? How can you fix the efficiency of what you do? And don't get caught up in, well, if my CEO did this, or if my boss did that, then we would be better at this. And it's really talking about individual accountability and ownership in that process. So I was able to stop the video at this point and have that image, and wanted to challenge everybody that we go about our jobs every day saying, what can we individually do better? Because cumulatively, we don't get there if each of us doesn't have that accountability and mindset. I want to review the concepts a little bit. The concepts of Lean are more value to your customers. It's the understanding of that customer value and focusing on the key processes that continually increase that value. The ultimate goal is to provide perfect value. Now, I'm going to tell you that I think that's one of those stretch goals that I'm not sure is really, truly always achievable. But if you're not trying to reach perfect value, you're not increasing the value. The last one is zero waste. What can we do for zero waste of the resources that we have in the process? I want to go to the third structure here that I talked a little bit about, which is NIST, NIST.gov. For anybody that's not aware, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is what NIST is. It's been around for quite some time, obviously, founded in 1901. It is now part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and it's one of the nation's oldest physical science laboratories. In short, they're in charge of creating standards measurements, and ways of which we can all agree to function. When you start thinking about what is the standard for a piece of technology, a lot of that starts with NIST. Here's the basis for which we're going to manufacture and work from, so that we have some sort of standards across multiple platforms. And it was established because we were second rate to other engineering companies in the early 1900s. We were falling behind, and somebody said we need a way that we can measure the way in which we're engineering these things, create standards, and then innovate beyond that so that we can keep up. There's a misconception because there's so much talk about NIST and measuring that it's really about creating measurements and standards, and the whole thought of innovation is lost. And the idea with NIST is if you're constantly measuring, you can constantly improve and focus on innovation. I want to give you an example of how NIST works in a day-to-day environment, particularly for technology. Here's an example of their cybersecurity framework. In the blue on the left, they talk a little bit about identifying a threat, protecting from that threat, detecting the threat when it's present, responding to that threat, and recovering. This is a framework that all companies can and should use in thinking about what could happen to them if they were to be attacked. We've obviously had enough instances in the news lately, and it is really in the last year, since we've had more of obviously the work from home model with the pandemic, that the attack is happening to people sitting at home, right? They're being scanned, they're being compromised, it's getting into companies, and you're finding more and more breaches. In this cybersecurity framework from NIST, they're walking you through identifying where your risks are as an organization. This is the exact template we sit down and go through with our clients and say, let's identify where your risks are. Do you have everybody in-house and lock and key that all your technology is locked up? Or is it dispersed throughout the country, particularly now when people are working from home? What data is it that you're trying to protect? Is it data that you have an obligation to protect because it's related to HIPAA or PCI? From that point, once you identify that data, you protect it and you develop safeguards. You also implement technology that will detect when an intruder is in there. How do you respond? Don't wait till the event happens. Know how you're going to respond. Know who your team is. Who's your incident response team? Who are those players? What are their responsibilities going to be? Because in that moment, you want to be responding with jobs and titles already assigned rather than asking who's doing what. It kind of reminds me of the Three Stooges with the skit of who's on first. You don't want to be there. You want to already know who's going to be there. The last is recovering. Learn what you did from the event, recover, minimize that impact from the next time, and restart the exercise all over again where you come through the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. When you take a look at the three governances that I talked about, this is just kind of my summary for that. Understand that the 3 Ps is about your internal organization and your structure and your policy. You have the employee handbook, you have the acceptable use, you have a disaster recovery plan. That's really where your 3 Ps lie. And I'm pretty sure that every one of you has some semblance of that now. The question is it adequate? Does it address enough things? Do you have a security policy if you have data that you're trying to protect? This is really a function of everybody within the business. It's not an HR function. It's not an IT function. It's a business function where everybody has to have a hand in it. Lean is no different. Everybody needs to be rowing in the same direction to increase efficiency, customer value, and zero waste. Last is with NIST, again, increasing the innovation, the function-specific templates and guidance that you can use to manage and implement technology better and have a standard of measurement. In my mind, these are really 3 of the processes that you ought to go to, and probably in that order with the 3 Ps, Lean and NIST, to do things better as technology evolves. We've been able to get by for years with doing things more in a less mature manner related to technology, because the technology wasn't as integrated into our everyday lives like it is now. But now that we have the Internet of Things and all the other integrations to our day-to-day lives, our businesses, the amount of data that's available, we've really got to be more mature in our handling of technology operations. That's going to lead us into the trends and the roadmap, and I'm going to kick right off with the evolution of technology, since I made the comment that we are now getting to a point where technology is more mature in our business and our everyday lives. We're going to talk a little bit about government trends. We're going to talk about connected communities. I want to talk about the reality of state of technology and really acknowledging where we're currently at. Non-negotiables for me in technology, things that we all need to be doing within our organization. the growing digital divide, which I believe has just grown that much wider in the last year, how automation, artificial intelligence, and security are solutions to help us solve those issues. Alicia, my counter keeps going to sleep on me. Can you give me an idea where I'm at?
It looks like we're it's an hour 7:20, but we've been on since 9, so no, I can't really tell you. It looks like we're at 10:28, so you've got plenty of time.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
And then think about my phone keep going to sleep and it reset on me. So, all right, so let's talk about the evolution of technology. I have this slide that really walks us through technology well before we know it now, right? Let's just take it back to what's first referred here as the first revolution, and it's the mechanization, steam, and water power, right? That was technology, very different than today, but that was part of the innovation that was occurring then and still has a place in today's world. The second revolution became about mass production and electricity. So we talked a little about Henry Ford and the mass production of vehicles. Obviously, World War II kicked off an entire production of equipment. Following World War II, we really went into another mass production and development as a country. Right after that, we got into what's the third revolution, electronic IT systems automation. It became about machines and manufacturing, mainframe computer systems. Probably the invention of internet long before many of us ever knew that it existed, right? Because it was specific to the government and maybe DoD use. And the blend of what third revolution into fourth revolution, which is where we're at today, is kind of the handoff that most of us will remember. It was the computers that we may have gotten one of in 1980 and had access to. If you were in school, you might have used it to play the Oregon Trail. If you were in business, you might have had the most rudimentary DOS programming system for finance of your business. But that was really that time frame. We started shifting from the third to the fourth revolution, and we're going to focus on the fourth revolution. This slide kind of talks about that transition from third to fourth revolution. And on the far left over here in the 1960s, it talks about the evolution of technology similar to the life cycle of a human being, where it just says we're babies, we're in our infancy, we're just figuring this thing out. We get into the 70s and we start using it for other things, and there's very little access for people, but now we're maybe toddlers that are crawling around. When we get to the 1980s, as a reference, we could go to Radio Shack and buy a Tandy computer. You know, we might have had one computer, we could not do a whole lot with it at that time, but we did have access to that technology and the computers. And at that point, you know, maybe we were a young child still playing with the technology, but we really can't make our own decisions. We get what we get, you buy it, you use it, but you can't do anymore. In the 1990s brought us Windows operating system, right? Personal computer, and it became more prevalent for people to have those computers. I remember going to college and everybody was expected to either have a computer or go to the computer lab. At that point in time, the one-to-one idea wasn't really there. It wasn't taking off. And most of us did get a computer, but there was 24-hour labs in college that you could go to and do your work. That became the teenage years where we liked the technology, we wanted the technology. We probably revolted a little bit if we didn't get the technology that we wanted, but it still wasn't mature. In the 2000s, we're starting to really become an adult about it, where we expect the technology, we're starting to get personal devices. I still remember the first pager I had that sent email text messages that notified me if there was something wrong that I had to go look at the network. And the interesting part about that is I still remember thinking when we built that system, what is our response time for this whenever we get that email? And it took into account people's lives that they might be out having lunch. Well, they can't look at the system till they finish lunch, get back to the office and log into the system at the office to do some work. At the time, that seemed sort of cutting edge to be able to carry your email alerts with you and be notified about things. But it really was still at that point where we had personal technology that wasn't fully integrated. That brought us the 2010s. The iPhones were out, we had iPads, and we really started doing more with our personal devices to the point where we're at today, that if we can't pick that up now and get the data in our hand for anything that we really expect, we're just sort of shocked. We're sort of thinking that maybe that's not a good solution. Maybe that's not a good product for us to buy. And we've reached sort of an adulthood. Now, I would question that a little bit because at some level, I think we've become so attached to those devices and the expectations that some days we got to step back as adults and say, okay, let's put down the technology and just watch the world around us. But from the evolution of technology standpoint, we finally arrived in a mature model for technology that isn't just something that we're using, but it's really something that's driving our day-to-day. And that's no different than our businesses. Technology has arrived at a maturity point that it is driving what our business does. So even though you're not a technology company, it's truly enabling your ability for employees to do work. It's enabling your ability to reach your customers. And it's also helping facilitate the engagement in the sales with your customers. One of the things I want to talk about in those trends is I pulled this from some of the information that Deloitte has out there and some work that it's done around government trends. And this is really some of the things that they're seeing a shift in over the recent years. And I'm going to say specifically ramped up since the pandemic started. And it's talking about government shift to utilizing technology to reach to what I would say is the taxpayer, whether it be business or individuals. It's talking about accelerated digital government, where the government's really shifting to get everything digital and make it available. It's talking about that seamless delivery. Do you have to go to the website, or can you get it on an app on your phone? Do you have to go into the courthouse to get the records, or are those available as well? There's a notion that's going on that's also about location liberation. Do you have to be in the building, or can you work from home? What if you can work from home and do the job without coming in? Fluid data dynamics in the government as a cognitive system are really about taking a look at the ever-changing data and making decisions. And, I don't think anybody's ever accused the government of being cutting edge and out and leading and fast moving. Part of that because of the responsibility of making decisions when they do that. Well, now with the idea of the fluid data dynamics and the cognitive system, the government is now using data more than ever and making decisions based on that data to move forward. Hopefully that'll make the processes and the opportunities for the government to move faster. And when you think about the level of governments where you have federal, state, county, and local, there's a lot of layers that the data and the decision making top to bottom has to go through. Well, if we're starting to integrate data, make data available, share data, reference that data, those 4 layers start operating much more efficiently in what they do. And therefore, the services to the taxpayers, the general community, gets better. It's creating a more agile government rather than red tape. The government's broader role in cyber is evident, where we're taking steps. And if you follow any of the technology news, I believe it was the end of last week, maybe this weekend, that the FBI announced that they actually stopped some of the money that was paid for ransomware for the Colonial Pipeline. If you want to say about government's broader role in cyber, I don't think we have to look any further than that. Everybody's aware of the attacks that have been happening, the ransomware, the Bitcoin charges, the government-sponsored attacks from other governments, and the announcement of how the FBI backwards engineered the transactions for that is just fascinating as an IT person. The part that's probably most important in my mind is there's a lot of operations that happen in the background at the government specific to cyber. And you don't always hear about them, right? Because they're not going to advertise what they're doing. They're not going to admit to some of the things that they're doing because it just helps out the adversaries. But they came out and said, listen, Colonial paid this ransomware to get back up and running. There were starting to be gas shortages on the East Coast, and they felt like it was the responsible thing to do, verbatim from the CEO of Colonial. It was the right and responsible thing to do for our country. That being said, when the FBI came back and said that they had reverse engineered basically how the transaction was happening, they got over $2 of the $4 million back. And for me, that is one of the greatest wins the government has had in playing a role in cyber. It's one of those things as a security engineer and an IT guy you look at and you just, you kind of just get excited and invigorated that we're able to fight back a little bit to the people that are across seas and seem untouchable. The government's become inclusive and equity-centered government. So it's bringing all these things together, again, sort of shortening the layers and getting everybody on the same page with the data and access to the systems. It's becoming inclusive and equity-centered. If the government continues to move in those directions and leveraging that data, it's going to sustain public trust. And I'll get into a little bit here in the next couple slides, just about understanding that consumer expectation if you're in the government sector. So from the government sector, I want to talk a little bit about connected communities. When Felicia did the introduction, she talked about an initiative I was part of called Adams County Connected. And the idea there was a connected community. It really ramped up about 10, 11 years ago. And it was the idea that we didn't have enough connectivity within the community to really bring anything else together, which meant we weren't all that terribly connected. There was government services that weren't fully available. First responders and public safety was just getting a 911 system to bring everything together. Healthcare was doing its own thing because it was healthcare and it didn't have a choice. So it was out running and able to develop its own network, but not without its own challenges. Education system was struggling because they had now gone to the one-to-one system, but they didn't have connectivity for all the students at home. And without some of that connectivity, there weren't businesses coming for economic development. And the businesses were a large part of what we needed to build in the connected communities, where people would want to come set up their businesses there and create a tax base that would support the community. This slide is a little bit of that picture in my mind of how some of that stuff looks. You have a different image here pretty much for everything that happens throughout your community, right? You got public transportation. You have people driving around in their car. The cars are now connected. You got the parking meter on the right side of the slide that, we're seeing a lot of parking meters now that are leveraging some sort of Wi-Fi connectivity where you can just pull up, use an app, and pay for your parking spot and right back to the government. You got the van over here on the right side that's talking about being connected. A lot of that could be news cars driving around. It could be the gas company picking up wireless meter reads. But at the end of the day, the only way for the community to be connected is if you do have the availability to be connected, whether it be cellular, whether it be Wi-Fi, whether it be fiber running through. It affects civic life. You have to have the technology available to do it. You get a new mobility, the infrastructure. There's just a lot of things that tie together in your community, and that's got to be led by the government. So when we talked about all the things that are changing in the government world, these are some of the things that are kind of pulling that along, that the government's really trying to meet to build a smarter city, smarter community, and more available. I'm going to talk a lot about the digital divide in this because I think that's the future, the end and the beginning and of everything for the future of the connected community. The realistic state that we're at now when we're talking about the connected communities or lack of is that there's an increasingly integration for IoT devices. Everywhere you go, you're hearing about it. We're wearing watches. Waste companies are putting meters on the back of the dumpsters. They use it for tracking where the dumpsters go. They use them for tracking if they've been emptied. Wastewater is using meters to check how much water is running off. It is just everywhere in our lives, in our schools, at work, in the government, everywhere. What it's really driving is required specialized skills. You can't just be a server administrator anymore who builds a server, runs an operating system, and makes it available for data storage. You really have to have virtualization skills, security skills, application development, at least to the point where you can hand off with some application developers. The skills to support technology are becoming more and more specialized, and there's becoming more and more skills needed. Cloud architecture engineers really just sit and build and design ways to bring all the technology together. That's a relatively new trade that you'll see in the IT industry. And the concept of cloud has been around for a long time. The old mainframe systems, could be considered that they were cloud at some point because you had a server back somewhere else that you were processing from. But now with the virtualization ability and going to Amazon Web Services and going to Azure and things like that, there's a specialized skill in just architecting all those solutions to come together. As I mentioned earlier, we've got to understand the change in consumer expectations, no matter what it is. If we're a school district with parents and students, their expectation to interact with the school, to get grades, to follow homework, I don't think that's ever been more evident than in the last year when we had to have education from home. I don't believe anybody was prepared for it a little over a year ago to happen. And it was probably a fairly daunting task for the school districts to undertake and continue operations. And if any of you out there are educators or in the school districts, kudos to you. You don't have to go further than a Facebook page to tell you didn't do a good enough job. and it wasn't an easy one. We continued the year and we're turning the corner, and I think a lot of people are ready to get back and get into schools. But the consumer expectations for you as a school district were immediate. We want to have this, we want to do this, we need access. We have to help our kids at home at school with schoolwork more than we've ever had to in the past. And how did we do that and have tools that are web-based? If you're in government, people want to be able to pay their taxes, pay their utility bills, go get land deed records online without having to go into the courthouse and things of that nature. So understand that those expectations have been placed upon you if you haven't already had that thought. And it's the Amazon effect. A lot of times I like to say, I can go online, I can get in my app, I can order what I want. It shows up in my door in 2 days. And I want everybody else to function that way too. So we really have to understand that no matter who we are, our consumers' expectations have really shortened and going up at the same time. Security is paramount. I've talked a lot about the security and where the state of the world is right now. Security is paramount. We'll get into a little bit more of that later. An alignment for technology leadership to be executive level. I am extremely biased on this, obviously, given my background. But when I talked earlier about technology maturing, it is at a point where it is in the business. It is not a separate department in a separate silo alone. Technology needs to sit at the executive table with the decision makers, superintendents, school boards, no matter what your role is. You need a technology expert at that table helping you integrate and make technology decisions. So the alignment of technology leadership has been happening for years, but we reached a point where it's really just a must at this point. That leads me into my non-negotiable improvements for us. I just think this is in general, specific to education, nonprofit, government. I think there's some work that can and needs to be done there as we talk about some of the data changes and the way things have gone, the expectations that have changed during the pandemic. And part of why I picked these non-negotiables is I think there's some areas for opportunity. A lot of it has to do with the pandemic stimulus funding and things that are out there. But if you're going to replace infrastructure, now's probably the time. You're in a technology cycle that says, it's not going to change and be on the tail end of a cycle right now. Investing now is a good move. The world is trying to pick back up and run. So from an infrastructure standpoint, if you have aging technology, it's probably not as secure as it ought to be. You're probably not delivering your services as well. So improving the infrastructure is one of the non-negotiables for me right now. Focusing on your internet connection. Again, the last year, pretty much everybody's been forced home to work, and it put a real strain on the internet and helped us identify where we're not getting good enough connectivity. It's not just about where we have it and how good it is, but it's where we don't have it. And that is a huge part of the stimulus money that is coming. So we really need to focus on the internet availability as well as the quality. And that's going to be a bigger conversation for the digital divide. As we focus on infrastructure and internet, it's got to be web-based solutions that follow that. We've got to get the ability to get access to the data in the solutions web-based for our constituents. If we're not there already, it's going there. If we're not in the cloud, you probably will be soon. And that's because, generally speaking, that's the only way to shorten your time frame for implementation and get that up and running versus the old days of we're going to take 18 months to deploy a new application. The cycle's really changed where 18 months is the beginning of a change in a life cycle. I would say that 36 months is probably the longest you'll see in a lot of the technologies. You don't have the time to take that amount of time to build out the solutions like you used to. As all these things are changing, the expectations are changing, the way we access our systems are changing. The one thing that we absolutely can't forget about is training and educating our staff. It is extremely important that our staff feel like they're educated and capable to utilize that technology as it changes. You see it time and time again where everybody wants to talk about what the capital investment's going to be to do the solution, and a lot of times training's not considered in that. It's considered after the fact. So as a lot of the solutions are changing, upgrading, changing, and expectations, don't forget about training and educating your staff. That doesn't mean everybody has to have the same training and education. You could have multiple people do different things. You could have leads that do some of the training and do a train-to-trainer model. But don't forget to train and educate your staff, or you won't be successful in that. Security needs to be a team sport. I stole that. I was in a conference the other week, and I've talked about this as security needs to be something everybody's focused on. But the presenter that I saw, talking said it needs to be a team sport, and it just resonated with me. I'm a sports guy, so the cliche worked, but it kind of draws people's attention to it's not just an IT thing. We're not just creating policies and administering systems. It really is a team sport. You have to have the accountability for your login and for noticing emails that come in and don't look right, and where you're choosing to be connected and store data. And if there's a policy that says this is where we keep data, keep it there. Because you bring it down to your computer, you go home and work, and maybe your computer gets compromised at home. That just comes back into the system that you're working for in your organization. So everybody needs to have an acceptance and be mindful of that. I think there was a day where people could say, I'm not an IT person and I'm not sure that applies to me, or I don't understand it. But I think as the technology has matured and it's as integrated into our day-to-day life as it is, that we need to be accepting that each one of us has some accountability in the security world. I will say that the leading of that still needs to come from the organization. IT needs to be a big part of that. HR needs to be a big part of that. Executive management needs to be a big part of that. But we all have to have an individual accountability to move forward. Last one is artificial intelligence. I think at some level we all know what artificial intelligence is. Specific to what we're talking about in IT, I would just say it's really the ability of the technology to work for us so we don't have to be 24/7. And it looks for things that we can't look for while we're sleeping. I like to throw this slide in most things that I do, just on a quick note of understanding your internet. I took this from one of the PA 511 cams. I figured at least it would be the Beltway in Harrisburg that most of us could relate to. And the one thing I want to make sure everybody understands about their internet connection is there's two things to consider. There's bandwidth, which is your capacity, and there's latency, which is your speed. Anytime you talk to one of your internet service providers, they're going to tell you, we're going to give you fast speeds and we're going to give you 100 by 20 connection. And that's really bandwidth. That's the amount of data that's being pushed. The latency, which they don't talk about often, is really the speed at which it's running. This picture for me helps everybody understand that. You have two different directions on the highway. The one on the right is full of cars and probably going 15 or 20 mile an hour. The one on the left hardly has any cars and they're probably going 55, or if we're being honest, 70. The difference here is that the speeds, as we understand them, are very different, but the capacity is not any different. The highways both have the ability to move 3 or 4 lanes of traffic in any which direction. But the fact is that the speed at which they're traveling is very different, and our internet connection is not any different than that. I always like to make sure that we educate people on that, because as we start talking about internet being paramount, we have to understand this concept. The stimulus money specifically draws out that you have to meet certain speeds, and it does it again in the 100 by 20 type model, which is really a capacity item. Some of the things we will talk about is a little bit more for speed. The growing digital divide is not going away. It's a need for improved ISP service. So wherever you get your internet service from, we need that to increase and improve. One of the things that I threw in here is SpaceX with Direct Link. This is Elon Musk's SpaceX venture that they're working on hanging low-level satellites into the atmosphere that is changing the game in satellite technology. That will probably be a big gap closer for the digital divide for people who are in areas that they can't get internet access, because it'll be provided in a speed and a capacity that we haven't been able to provide in those remote areas. In less remote areas, we'll continue to rely on LTE in the future, which is 5G technology for cellular. You've probably heard a lot about that. The last thing that is sort of a interest of mine that I think there's a lot of areas where we could be doing community-owned air fiber solutions. The Wi-Fi solutions can be done for miles now. You can mesh it across communities. There's counties within this state that are fully meshed, which means anywhere they go in the county, they're basically getting a Wi-Fi signal. In my mind, that's a good area to do high-speed, long-range wireless mesh across the communities, leverage government services. EMS could benefit from that. Schools could benefit for that. Community centers, healthcare, households could get internet access that didn't have an opportunity to have that in the past. So I think the air fiber solutions are a real opportunity for government entities to lead and put that in. When you start talking about the schools and you go back to that model that I showed around a connected community and the things that need to happen, there's a great opportunity to close that digital divide for the students. And again, I'll mention, if we don't find a way to get meaningful internet access to the students that do not have it. We will continue to have a digital divide between those that have it and those that don't. That will be our future, and we do not want that to be our legacy. Automation has changed the game. It's shortening the life cycle of technology. We used to talk about everything in 3 and 5 and 7 years. And we don't talk about them in 7 years anymore, and we rarely focus on them for a 5-year. The automation is software driven. It's changing things so rapidly that things aren't extending past that as a guarantee anymore. The change management cycle of that equipment is shorter than it's ever been. And I mentioned earlier about some of that stuff being shorter. I really think it's gotten to 18 to 36 months for most of the technology before something else has come out and surpassed it. It is, on the other hand, simplifying operations. You can do testing of your configuration changes. You can do testing of your implementation of applications, and you can schedule that for off hours. So it is simplifying that operation in that manner. When you can do that, it's increasing in efficiency because you can replicate it over and over and over without building it from scratch. It improves the quality and accuracy because if you can build it, replicate it, test it, and build it and replicate it and test it over and over and over, you can improve the quality and accuracy by the time it comes to implementation. You can integrate the technologies through automation now because it's using some of the artificial intelligence and understanding how to piece together and integrate the different pieces of software. Workflows leveraging if-then statements. So if you think about having a solution, maybe SharePoint or something in the cloud, where you're utilizing that for document storage and workflow, you can use the if-then statements. If the document comes in completed, then send it to this person for processing. If the document comes in incomplete, please respond to the person that submitted it and ask them to fill out the rest of the categories. If the document field says this, send it to this department. And if it comes in with this answer, send it to this department. When we start talking about the improvement in efficiency for the government, there's a great way to provide services to the community and to the taxpayers to get those documents out there when you leverage the web services and technologies in that manner. The last thing that automation will do is audit, validate, and alert. So it'll do an audit of your systems. It'll validate that they meet the criteria that you provided. And if there's something that doesn't necessarily match up, it will alert that something is wrong. Again, now automation is taking care of that for you instead of having to sit there and pour through hours and hours of work just to do a simple validation. Artificial intelligence is learning behavior. It's identifying anomalies. It's quantitative programming. It works while you sleep, and it'll give you a variance report. So, you know, there's a lot of things with artificial intelligence that I think make all of us a little uncomfortable about the computers taking over, as some of the movies have shown us in the past. But there's some really good things that it's doing. And from a security standpoint, bar none, it has been a great improvement for all of us and our organizations. Again, it's going to work while you sleep and protect. It's going to take proactive measure when it sees certain things happening to make sure that people are protected. And that is a good thing. That is changing and protecting our systems as they evolve and become more and more integrated and possibly vulnerable. Back to security as a team sport. It felt it was important enough to mention again, it's individual accountability. It's having good organizational best practices. It's next generation security solutions at the endpoint. The acronyms out to the right are about response. The R is response. So with artificial intelligence, it's actually responding to threats, not just identifying and notifying. If somebody's asleep or not sitting there watching their screen, they can't do anything about it. The response part of the artificial intelligence is responding for you and notifying you till you get a chance to get there, stopping threats in their tracks. Leverage as a service. Again, we talked about having to build out infrastructure and solutions and the time frame to it. As a service is ready to go today. There is an integration and a time frame for getting it in your environment, but the solutions are already built. All you need to do is procure them and do some pretty seamless integrations to your environment. If you don't have technology leadership, identify and empower a security officer, a VCIO or Chief Information Officer, or a VCISO, Chief Information Security Officer. You must have somebody thinking about those things for you. And many organizations won't make the investment for a full-time employee in that position, but you can get those as a service throughout the week, month, and year. Capitalize on the current opportunity. So, you know, the pandemic has been awful for a lot of reasons. But right now, as we turn the corner, hopefully, as we get back to normal, as the government is pumping record amounts of money into our system, capitalize on that opportunity. Find yourself some strategic leadership, leverage as a service, get the stimulus money. That strategic leadership is about shared business function. It is not just IT, it is everybody working together. We just finished an engagement with a client who had us really come in and review their whole business strategy and then talk to them about how to build the IT strategy. And the first recommendation coming out of that 3 or 4 month engagement was you need a steering committee, because IT can't be the one sitting there trying to make decisions for the business in this regards. We need a dedicated group of folks with responsibility for the business to make the strategic decisions for the business, and then let IT go handle the operations at that point. The 3 Ps is a shared business function. That same steering committee is going to work on that. Again, HR, finance, business unit, technology. Those policies, processes, and procedure are a shared responsibility within the business. Compliance is a shared business function. Again, all the same group, and making sure that all the silos are working in the same direction. When we talk about those 3 Ps, and then we talk about lean and efficiency and value, that all starts to tier up. And when we start working in a lean manner, then we can move to NIST from an operational templated way of doing those functions. Empower that person, empower the CIO, and let technology operations lead in some of those discussions. Leverage as a service, so acknowledge that business to consumer relationship. The consumer driven idea of expectations has really driven those business relationships. Understand that consumer piece in the business to business relationship. Shorten your implementation timeframes by leveraging as a service. Leverage resources you do not have internally. Most places do not have those specialized resources internally, and that's okay. There are ways to go out and contract those to get them in to move things forward, and as a service will help you do that. As a service helps you with the elasticity of the market growth and contraction. So you buy that per seat, whatever that may be. It may be employees, it may be number of buildings, it may be something of that nature, but it will expand and contract with you as you need it to. Extend those same resources to the constituents. So as you have those web resources, as you have those systems available, you know, I put in there taxpayers, because usually in education, you're going to have the taxpayers in K-12, and government, you're going to have the taxpayers as well, and they're all the same people looking for some of those same resources. If you have systems available to do some of those things, and you can make them public facing and push your services out, that's really what those consumers or taxpayers are looking for from you. When you go to leverage as a service, you offload a significant amount of risk, significant amount of human error in that, especially if it's using automation and artificial intelligence. You can improve your service, lower your costs, and you can lead by connecting your community. I think that is important. I think a lot of people are looking for some of that leadership from those solutions, and when you lead, people tend to follow. We're almost at the end. I apologize here. For improving the services, I'm just going to touch on the fact that there's digital adoption of real-time services, integration of IoT technology, cognitive behavior, data-driven. They all tie into how you implement the 3 Ps, how you increase your efficiency, add customer value, zero waste, and measure it to innovate. So adopt the real-time web services, integrate IoT into what you're doing in your business. Cognitive behavior beyond the data-driven piece where you're collecting, assessing, and making better decisions. That's the key to improving your services moving forward. And right now, there's never been a better time, as I indicated, for investing in recovery. And that kind of is contradictory, because investing insinuates that you're putting something in you expect to get back in the future, but recovery insinuates that you're reacting to something that occurred. And if you haven't spent any time reading through the stimulus packages, I can understand some of it is a little bit boring, but there's some intriguing statements in there. And that's sort of where I got the investing in recovery piece, because it talks heavily about putting money into the system to help recover from the things that have happened in the last 15, 16 months. And really what they are doing is helping to bridge that gap and investing in the future while we recover. The government has clearly come out and said infrastructure, internet, security, constituent improvements, education of staff and resources. It's very clear where they want the money to go. Here's some of the ways that they talk about it, from public health to lost revenue, water and sewer infrastructure, economic impact, premium pay for essential workers, and broadband infrastructure. And for anybody sitting here looking for different, better, more internet connectivity is involved in that space, go read about the broadband infrastructure requirements. There's a lot of emphasis on that. One of the things that I will share is the way in which you can do some of those items is they broadly talk about it, but we have some education environments that are using some of that stimulus money for security because they have people working remotely that they haven't in the past, particularly in higher ed where they're forced to be meeting GLBA compliant. And some of the language is what is different today as a result of the pandemic that you didn't have before. And they're finding ways to put endpoint protection or artificial intelligence local to their data center to increase their security because now they have a dispersed workforce that's been working from home. So when you look at some of the parameters, think a little bit outside the box and how you apply some of that technology, the endpoint protection, artificial intelligence, and make sure there's somebody leading that piece of it from a strategic standpoint. This is just a snapshot of where they're going to direct some of the money at the state, county, city, tribal territory levels. There's a lot more to it than that, but they have broken it down on how they want to do that. This is their way of saying we're going to give the state money, but we're going to ensure the counties are going to get some money too. Almost last piece, this is from Future Ed about how the money's breaking down if you're in the education sector. That is a boatload of money, and they have designated it to improve and continue the education. And there's a lot of that, again, designated for broadband and getting that connection to people from home so that they are not left behind in the digital divide. There's some quick links. future-ed.org and home.treasury.gov have a lot of information on the stimulus money. Google for the American Recovery Act, you'll find a lot more information. Thank you and good luck. Apologize for keeping you a few extra minutes. I tend to have a lot to say in some of these items. I'm pretty passionate about it. And Felicia, I don't know if there's any questions you want to field now or have people follow up with me later, given where we're at for time.
If you could, can you put your contact information in the chat area? I don't see any questions at this point. Ann, are you ready to speak?
Yep, whenever you are. Yep.
So let me introduce Ann. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll put my contact information in there and you can get them to me. So if I can introduce Ann, she is the president and CEO of the Technology Council of Central Pennsylvania. I talked about the Technology Council in my presentation today, being a member of the organization myself. I asked Ann to talk to us about TCCP and how professionals like yourself may benefit from participating in the organization. Ann became the Technology Council of Central Pennsylvania's president and CEO in August of 2019, bringing with her more than 25 years of nonprofit management, fundraising, marketing, public relations, strategic planning, and partnership development experience. Long story short, I think Ann has a lot of knowledge and knows what she's doing. Having previously served in a variety of executive roles with Franklin and Marshall College, Ronald McDonald House, Charities of Central Pennsylvania, Girl Scouts in the Heart of Pennsylvania, and Catholic Health Initiatives, Ann has a successful track record of leading organizations and helping them exceed operational and fiscal objectives while also cultivating key strategic partners. Ann, thank you for joining us today.
All right, thanks, Josh. I'm just going to very quickly share my screen so you have something to look at other than just me. So bear with me a second, and here we go. So good morning, everyone. The Technology Council has been around since the 1990s, so you may or may not have heard of us previously. We've looked different at different times in our history, but our mission has stayed consistent in our commitment to developing a thriving technology community and fueling economic development throughout the region remains. And one of the things, Josh briefly mentioned this as well, we really believe that bringing together the technology community unleashes unimaginable capacity for our region to thrive. And what that means is that really we're encouraging tech users and tech producers to come together to collaborate, to learn, and to innovate together. And we offer a number of different types of opportunities for our members and for non-members to be a part of that. So if you have an interest in learning a little bit more about some of the hot topics in technology and also some of the local resources and assets that we have right here throughout Central Pennsylvania, I encourage you to even attend some of our events or programs as a non-member. When you look at our priorities and I apologize, this is not really coming up as a full slide, but our priorities focus on a few different things. One, we want to create opportunities to encourage co-creation of solutions to problems that may be tech specific or where tech innovation may be a solution. And so that priority focuses on collaborating to solve strategic problems. And so we create space for our members and our non-members to come together to talk about some of those challenges, but also opportunities and how can we solve those while working together. We also focus on recruiting diverse tech talent. And tech talent, when we look at the need, there's a huge need for tech talent, but also finding tech talent that creates an environment that drives innovation. And a lot of times that means that we're talking about helping our members in the tech community to recruit and retain diverse tech talent in terms of gender, race and ethnicity, in terms of age, in terms of perspective on the world, in terms of life experience. And so we help them do that as well. We also encourage an environment that encourages peers to stay sharp with one another. A lot of our programming and events are really about lifelong learning and an opportunity for people to not only make connections with peers, but also to learn from one another, because sometimes we can learn from others so that we don't either make the same mistake or that we actually learn from their positive experience and don't have to spend a lot of time spinning our wheels doing additional research. We also focus on helping our members grow their business and promoting the region. So we do that by programs and events. And so this is just a slide that kind of gives you a sampling of some of the various programs that we offer. A lot of these, obviously during the pandemic shifted to 100% virtual, and many will remain that way. And the reason is because we really do serve a very broad region, and we want to eliminate as many barriers to participation as possible. So these types of programs, like our Tech Talks, which challenge people to think about something related to technology that may be controversial, tech roundtables that start to expose people to up and coming technology or resources that are available that they may not be aware of. Our Tech Work Series that exposes and gives attendees information about different ways that the future tech workforce is being cultivated and educated and prepared for their new roles. Our virtual peer learning groups that focus around different topical themes, meet over the lunch hour, to discuss things like project management, cloud strategy, DevOps, and data analytics. For now, we're going to be adding a cybersecurity peer learning group this fall. All of those are self-driven by the attendees. The agenda is developed by them as they bring to the table questions or comments or discussion items that they'd like to pose to the group for feedback. And our Women in Tech quarterly events, some of those will stay virtual and some of those will be in person. We'll see a mix of those. So lots of different ways for someone who is, whether you're a tech producer or a tech user, can participate and attend these events and learn some new things while also connecting with others who may be in similar work area as you or different, but potential collaborators on problems or solutions that you're working on. One of the things that's really big with the Tech Council is engaging our members in discussion about ways that we can continue to evolve and introduce programming that is of high need and of interest on their part. And one of those is an example of a cohort that we introduced just this past spring called Tech Execs. It's an opportunity for technology decision makers to come together in a monthly cohort. Each month they learn about and discuss a different topic about how it's impacting them personally, but also their businesses and decisions they make related to tech strategy. So just put that out there as we're always kind of listening to folks and introducing some new opportunities. Those also include our different events. So our programs are often free for our members. There might be there's a charge for non-members to attend a la carte. Our events, our members attend at a very discounted rate versus non-members, and they focus around different topics. The most recent one was our Central PA Innovate event that just happened last Thursday, which was really literally a showcase of all the different technology resources and assets that exist throughout the region, giving them a platform to talk about what they do, an innovation that they have worked on that they really want to, in essence, brag about, so that people know that this exists here, it's happening right here in Central PA, and that you don't have to reach out to Silicon Valley and some of those larger metropolitan areas in all cases to find solutions or partners to work with on projects. And lastly, just wanted to mention, if you're interested in joining the Tech Council, our membership is actually based on the number of employees that you want to have on your membership. So it's not based on the full number of employees that you have, like some of our other trade association partners, but it does focus on the number of employees. Starting at $500, we do have individual rates as well. And these are some of the benefits of joining the Tech Council. Most importantly, it really introduces you to a network that may provide you with access and information and resources within the tech community in Central PA that you may not otherwise have access to. So I would encourage, if you're interested in learning more, reach out to me. Our website is right on this slide at tccp.org. You can find out all of that information along with how to reach me right there. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Kim, and I will go on to the next part of the presentation. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Anne. And I am going to now share my screen. And do you see that, Felicia? You see my screen there?
I do.
Got it. Okay. And just wanted to say thanks to both Josh and Anne for the valuable information you shared with us today. As you digest the information you learned from Josh and start to strategize new technology implementation, you may want to look to the numerous COSTARS contracts to help you upgrade your systems and processes in categories such as a service, automation, collaboration, continuity, infrastructure, mobility, parking meters and electronic payment software, security, staff training, and wireless. We do have a variety of contracts available to you, both COSTARS exclusive and statewide contracts. You'll see here our COSTARS exclusive contracts are COSTARS 3 IT hardware, COSTARS 6 software, and COSTARS 33. We have parking meters, but it's street lighting, parking meters, and street furniture, aka streetscape. Also, we have a variety of statewide COSTARS enabled contracts that are available to our COSTARS members, and we have them listed here, and we will provide in our follow-up email after the event links to search them on the COSTARS website, as well as eMarketplace, where you can search these contracts and find out more, get more details about the contracts. If you have questions about the contracts that we've covered here, or you cannot find an answer to a question in many of the resources that are available to you on our COSTARS website, the COSTARS team is always here to help. This contact information here will connect you to the COSTARS team. So if an individual happens to be unavailable, others will be aware you've reached out and they can help you. And we've listed our toll-free number here, our website, our dedicated email, and we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, so follow us there. And we realize we've covered a lot of information today. We're going to open up the chat now if you do have any questions. And Felicia is also going to post a link, a survey link in the chat. We ask that you take the survey to provide us with any feedback. This helps us when we're putting together future webinars. And that's all we have for today, and thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please post them to the chat.
We have a quiet group here today, but I'm really glad that so many of you were able to stay with us to hear all of the good information that we had to share with you today.
Felicia, I'm seeing in the chat a lot of people, it looks like it says they no longer have access. I'm not sure if they are able to type and at least read the information there.
I'm looking at the participant list. I think they are leaving, and that's why we're seeing that message in the chat.
Okay, excellent.
So they're probably filling out the survey and hanging up.
Good deal.
Mhm. That was really great info today. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate you having me.
I think we'll give it another minute, and if nobody has any questions, then we'll end the presentation for today. Josh, do you see Darla's question in the chat?
Reading. Yep, reading it right now.
And Ben, the recording of the session today will be available. I will be sending a post-event email, so you will receive the recording of the event. Hopefully somewhat edited with my Teams issues edited out.
Darla, this is Josh, and I'll chime in there. You know, I think it's going to be interesting as people go back to the office and allude a little bit to the fact that some people may not, some businesses are considering staying remote if for no other reason than employee benefit of balance of being at work and at home. So I think there's a couple things to think about. I'd imagine most people are doing the video piece from laptops or desktops with a USB camera, perhaps currently at home, and that will probably continue in the office. If you're sitting at your desk and have access to a laptop or desktop with a camera, you're probably set, right? But when you're back in the office, it might be 3, 4, 5 people that are trying to come together, and that's where the challenge would arise. I would assume you already have the platform of Teams or Zoom or WebEx or Google or whatever you may be using for that platform. The hardware infrastructure is a little bit different, but pretty similar. I'll be honest, we have several units in our office that are really just a slim form factor desktop that actually there's a bracket for, and it fits on the back of a TV. So if you buy a large enough TV, and I always tell people 60, 65 inches is not overkill, because till you sit at a table and have to look at it, you're going to want the real estate for the TV. So probably at minimum is a 65-inch 4K smart TV is usually my preference. You can put a small form factor computer on the back side of that TV with a mounting bracket and use a wireless keyboard and mouse. If you output the video via HDMI to the TV, you really now have a cost-effective video conferencing unit. You can go out and spend more money. There are systems that do that. For most people, I think it's probably overkill and very expensive, but for $1,500, you can have a computer and a TV mounted on a wall in a conference room and have the ability to sit around a table and video conference with a group of people rather than just a desktop or laptop. And that's been pretty effective. In our bigger conference room, we have 2 65s, one for video so we can watch each other, and then one that brings up whatever content we're reviewing. So we have 2 TVs in that room. So hopefully that answers your question. If you have more thoughts on that and I didn't answer it, feel free to put back in the chat. You're welcome.
Okay, any more questions? It's looking like we're, yeah, it looks like we're down to 3 attendees still remaining. So last call for questions, and just refer to the chat for Josh's contact information. And if you haven't filled out the survey yet, the link is in the chat for that as well.
And we can provide that in the follow-up email as well.
True. All right, well, I thank you for attending, and we will see you on our next webinar. And you can visit our webpage www.dgs.pa.gov/COSTARS, and click the program resources button to see our event calendar. And that's where you can register for any future webinars that we have. And I'll put this in the chat too. There you go. And we are going to call this a wrap. Thank you for joining. We appreciate it.
Have a
Thanks,
good day.
Josh. Thanks, Ann.
Thanks.
You're
Thanks,
welcome. Have a good
Sam.
week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.